Welcome to Creatives in Quarantine. I'm Tiwana Floyd, your host. This week, I speak with James J. Johnson, also known as JJ, an actor, playwright, and screenwriter who wrote original monologues during quarantine, helping his fellow actors compete for cash prizes to supplement their income. From this project, JJ was commissioned to write a film that's currently in pre-production. Here's JJ. So I was saying that I can't really recall the day that I met you, and I think it was Bergdorf Goodman. Oh, it was.
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's my recollection as well.
Okay, great. Were you working there? That part I can't remember.
I was working for the security agency that was kind of, I guess, a subcontractor that Will worked for as well.
Right.
Had come in, I guess. And he had been telling me about you, I guess, for like a year or whatever. How long you covered other. And he would always talk about how cool Tiwana is. And, to meet her one day. Yeah, that's
the homie. I remember because that, I think when he came, it was towards the time when I was starting to prepare to depart that company, and I was paying off all my bills, and then I was making so much money that it became hard for me to quit. And so I didn't really talk to a lot of people and tell them what I was doing. I was auditioning. I just finished my Meisner Conservatory, and they had a restaurant at the top of Berkeley. Well, you know that, but
right.
Who are watching this don't know. There's a restaurant, or actually there's a cafeteria for the employees at the top of the building. And I was getting off the elevator, and he was coming on, and I had a backstage under my arm, and I was like, "Hey, Will," and I walked by. He's like, "Backstage? You an actor?" And I paused, like nervous, and I was like, "Yeah," because I didn't want people to know. And then that brought us even closer together. And then I believe shortly thereafter, you may have started working there as well. And then it was just like a little family. Like
Right. 17 years ago.
That's about right.
Yeah.
And I was telling you this, but I spoke to Dion Dane, who I met when you came to LA, and we went to the Prince, and she came with, was it Mildred?
Yes.
And I was like, these two are interesting, I've seen Mildred perform a couple times, and I'll go over to her and be like, "Hey, I met you through JJ." And she's like, "Oh, okay." But Dion, we seem to have found a connection. And as I was telling her about, we're actually in the same mastermind group. And I was telling the group about how awestruck I am about her career, the way it looks. And I said, yeah, we met through a friend who's in the DMV area, and anybody that comes through JJ is all right with me. And so, she co-signed on that. And then I was like, oh, I got to ask JJ to do this just because he's in the DMV. We could talk too.
Yeah. We still be holding it down out here in the DMV.
Yeah, y'all do. Absolutely. I keep an eye out a little bit when I can. And so I know you as an actor, but you have many creative outlets as well. Tell us about your acting career. How did you become an actor? How did you get to where you are now?
Wow. How long do we have?
We got an hour, but we'll see what happens.
So, I mean, I guess the first time the idea of entertainment popped in my head was around the age of 9. And the Cosby Show had just started to air. It was like 84. And I was just like head over heels for the Cosby Show, like the comedy. And I had just been introduced to Bill Cosby's stand-up, Bill Cosby himself, like a year or so before that. So, so stand-up comedy had started to kind of, roll around in my consciousness, and became a fan of stand-up. And then when the Cosby Show came out, I was like, yeah, I want to do comedy. I want to do that. Like, that's what I want to grow up and be able to be on that show. And so I clocked Bill Cosby's career, and I began to read about him, et cetera. And, I started to get outside of Bill Cosby, I started to get more into stand-up comedy itself. And my parents wouldn't let me watch like Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor back then. But I was just clocking like A&E's Evening at the Improv, or just whatever show I could watch where stand-up was on. And so like my first aspiration was to grow up to become a stand-up comedian. And then I think it was around high school when I actually started to do theater and realized like, oh, I actually enjoy both sides. I enjoy the comedy as well as the dramatic. and then went on to study theater at VCU in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
And then came out and started in DC.
What is VCU?
Virginia Commonwealth University.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. And then and what was that last part? And then you...
I graduated and came and started working in DC.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how long before or after graduating college and working in DC did you decide to move to New York?
So I started in 97 in DC, and 2003 was when I was leasing an apartment, or actually a townhome in Falls Church, Virginia. And my lease was coming up, was ending in at the end of July, 2003. And I was like 6 months away from turning, it's 2003, I was 6 months away from turning 28. No, 29. And I was like, let me go ahead, let me think about New York before I turn 30. Like what would it look like if I just, just like threw caution to the wind? Yeah. I didn't have anything saved up, you know what I mean? So I was like, what if I just, go to New York? And so I got a backstage. I can't remember if I subscribed or what happened, but I remember getting a backstage. Well, and I was sitting at work one day, and it was like early July, late June. And I saw an ad for a Richard III, all Black production being done in Manhattan. Yeah. And I was like, yo, I do Shakespeare. I should jump up there and see, just to see what happens. Right. And so I remember and I had never auditioned in New York before. Oh, wow. And I'm trying to think if I had come to New York by myself once before then. So this is completely new to me. Mm-hmm. So I came up to New York and auditioned. It was a company called Take Wing and Soar Productions, which is still around. Yeah. That Deborah Ann Bird. Yeah. Yeah. And so I came up and auditioned and had a great audition. I did a comedic Shakespeare monologue for one of Shakespeare's tragedies, and I think that kind of helped me to stick out. Mm-hmm. And they called me back the same day, and so I had to kick around Manhattan for the whole day, and come back that night, and had to call back, and then came back to Virginia, and it was just working, going back to my regular life. And I think it was a week or two later when they contacted me and said, "Hey, we would like to cast you," and I'm like, cast me. So I had 2 weeks to find a place to live and figure out what I was going to do. And so when I came to New York, my first day in New York was my first rehearsal with Richard III. And I had no money, but fortunately, I had a friend who needed a roommate. Mm-hmm. And I came up and I had $800 or something from my last paycheck. Mm-hmm. And so I was so broke, but yeah, I came up and, I started with that show, and then, went to the next show, and, pretty much did shows the entire year I was there. Mm-hmm. But I was non-union, of course. I wasn't making any money doing mm-hmm. that. So that's why I ended up doing the security gig. Were you only there for a year? About a year and a half. Oh my goodness. It felt like longer. I had no idea, because I did see that play. I had no idea that that's what brought you to New York. Yeah. And it was me taking a chance. Yeah. And it was your first job as well. And it was a really great production. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it got 5 Adelco nominations, and I was so fortunate to be a part of that, because again, I just saw it in the backstage and just. Right. Oh my goodness. And for people who don't know what Backstage is, that's kind of the actor's publication for work and articles or whatever, but it's been around probably since the 30s or something? I don't know. It's been around for a long time. I feel like I heard Lucille Ball talk about it, but I'm not sure. I can't. Wow. I listen to so much content, it starts to blur together. Right. But I did not know that was it, and that was a powerful cast. I remember, was it Phyllis Yvonne Stickney's brother was Timothy Stickney, right? Yeah. And at the time he was on One Life to Live or something. He was a brother, chocolate man with long locks on a soap opera. So it was that in itself was profound. And I remember a lot about that. I remember the fight. And Keith Arthur Bolden's wife. Yes, Tinashe. Was in it as well. Mm-hmm. And I met her later, just all entangled, but I had no idea that was it. So. And what's interesting too,
because I'm from New York, so I at that time did not know what it was like for a transplant to come to a major city that's expensive and try to make it, until I left New York and came to LA. And then now I'm like, oh, this is what people were dealing with. And I wish that I was more sensitive or more aware to have been more, have more outreach to my transplant friends. But
I mean, like it was one of those things I had to experience and just see what it was, because I had gotten pretty comfortable in DC because I already had a community here. And I had a great job. And so like, I was like, oh, wherever I go, I'm going to be able to build this. And I was able to build some community, but like, as far as like finding income, like my arms were flailing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so was that the impetus for you going back to DC or Virginia?
Well, I mean, it was, I didn't have necessarily the thought that I'm going back to stay. I had auditioned. A friend of mine who worked at Ford's Theater in DC had reached out to me in like August 2004 to let me know that Ford's was looking on the hunt for a 27-year-old black male to come do A Member of the Wedding, Carson McCullers play. And I was like, Ford's Theater, I mean, I'm not in equity. They're pretty big, and they're not going to hire me. And so I came down and auditioned, and Marshall W. Mason, who was co-founder of the Circle Rep Theater decades ago, with Lanford Wilson, I think, on Broadway. He co-founded that theater company. He was directing for this production, and went in and auditioned, and like he and I just like hit it off from the beginning. It was just one of those very weird, once in a lifetime type of things. And auditioned, and then stayed at my parents' in Front Row, Virginia, and stayed for the callback. And then, waited patiently. And I came back to New York, and I guess it was a couple weeks later when they informed me that, they wanted to hire me. And the show was starting rehearsal January 2005. So I had like 4 months to, like kind of wrap things up in New York. And I had a couple shows to go in New York. But my thought was that I was going to come down, turn equity, because Ford's offered me equity at that point, and then come back to New York after the show was done. So I came to DC, did the show, worked with some incredible people on that production. Linda Gravatt, who is, Broadway actress and does TV and film, as well as like some DC legends, Jewel Robinson, Doug Brown, etc. But did that show and reconnected with my people here at DC, and was making the money from Ford's, and it was just like, it's just comfortable being back home in DC. Like, this is my community. Like, DC is such a community-oriented type of theater community that it's hard to be outside of it once you're really like dug in. So I ended up staying at that point, but I would still come back. I think I came back for like a year or so to audition on occasion, and come back and visit Will and see you all sometimes. But that's how I ended up coming back to DC and staying.
Yeah, I'm struck by that because for anybody who's listening or watching, they don't really know the plight of the artist, specifically the actor, and the things that we endure on a daily. It's just, they'll see us in a show or television or something like that, and then think that that's something that we do all the time, but there's all this stuff in between. And I like that you're talking about the decisions. A lot of times we're really fortunate if we're heeding the call, if we're listening to our intuition that tells us to just go to this audition. I'm not equity, but I'm going to try it anyway. Let me go back to DC and do this audition, although that's a major theater, but why not? So when we take those heeds, when we take that inspiration and act on it, a lot of times it will lead to something else. We just don't know what.
Yeah.
But it's hard to know where we're going to end up or land. We just work on the craft, work on the business, and then show up.
And like the irony of that was that I went to New York, with the hope of making it, or, doing something big. And, I did some great things, but when I got back to DC within that year, I went equity and SAG, so it's just like, it's, you just don't know how life to lead you.
It's almost as if you just needed to go to New York to get immersed in that community, meet those people, get that credit, and then and then come back home to the community that supports you. And then it's like, oh, it's almost like when when you're in a major market and then you go to a smaller market, then it's more recognizable, it holds more gravitas or something like that. I'm not sure.
It's a big joke in DC that, we have to go to New York to get hired here. It's a huge inside joke. And it's true sometimes. And for me, it was true.
Right.
Yeah.
So then how do you now, because you're hilarious to me, and I learned when we were hanging out back in the day that you were interested in comedy, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And you'll post some funny things also. The thing that came to me this morning was the image of you doing a self-tape. I think you did it for Instagram, and you're sitting there with no pants on.
Oh. Yeah.
And just to show how this world and this industry is so intertwined, I was taking a refresher commercial class, and this sister was in the class with me. And at the end of our weekend, we did a weekend intensive. She and I exchanged information, and she started telling me about this Instagram thing that her and her friend have called #booked. So it was Lanisa Frederick, and she showed me your photo, and I'm like, that's my friend JJ. And she's like, you know him? She's like, I don't know him. I just saw it and thought it was funny. This world, boy.
I'm gonna tell you how she and I connected initially, because where I used to work was a closed captioning place that has an office here in Virginia and another office in LA. Mm-hmm. And actors, tend to work, find work there because it's centered around television. But I think she was thinking about applying. It was some years ago. And so I guess she saw through LinkedIn or something, she saw that I worked there. And so she reached out just kind of asking me questions about it, and so we became Facebook friends. And then I started to see this #book thing. I'm like, oh, she's doing her thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's just interesting. That's how we initially connected, was through LinkedIn, because she was inquiring about the place where I worked, my side job.
Wow. Such a small world.
Yeah.
So how do you incorporate, how do you get to comedy now that you have this foundation of Shakespeare and theater and drama? How do you get to comedy? How do you do the stand-up?
Well, the first time I actually tried stand-up, quote unquote, was my father's a pastor. And so the church organization that we belong to, my father's church belongs to, was having this dinner honoring him. And they asked me, would I be willing to roast him? I'm like, oh yeah, please. And so that was the initial thought, oh, maybe, I can just try it out, see if I can come up with some stuff about my dad. Cause my dad's a funny dude. So there was no problem. And just try it out. So my first time doing it was for a very friendly audience, but I felt like I had some good material in that. And then after that, they would invite me to do just short stand-up sets for church functions and events. And doing it was fun, but I also I got on my own nerves because I overthought a lot of things, and just trying to piece parts together, or things that I thought was funny that didn't quite work. And so I didn't do it a lot, but it was just something I just did on occasions. I did it last year for a Veterans Day event. It was the first time I had ever done it for not a church group, and it went well. But I just like to make people laugh, and so I find ways to do that, either with status updates on Facebook, little silly videos, or pictures, like I did with the Instagram photo you mentioned. But I did the shoulder work video that it went, I guess, semi-viral or whatever. But just these ideas that come to me, and I think they're born from just all the different influences of comedy that I watched over the years, from Def Comedy Jam to Monty Python to Carol Burnett show, just all that type of comedy that I find absolutely hilarious. I think just creeps into my psyche. And so these ideas just come up. And I'm just always trying to observe and just keep my mind open to whatever inspirations.
I find it interesting that you started following Bill Cosby, who was always known as a clean comedian. And then your first gig winds up to be in a church where you have to be clean. So it probably wasn't hard for you to make sure that you didn't curse or say anything foul or anything.
Right. And so that's even when I thought about do I want to do open mics, or do I want to try to do comedy outside of just, and I've had the debate, do I just, speak as I speak, or do I try to clean it up you know, as I have been doing. Like, I think it's a good challenge to, you know, someone trying to be funny to try and do clean comedy, you know, because I think it does feel easier sometimes, or you know, or cheap. I don't want to say cheaper, but it seems like it's easy to throw in the MF or something to make something funny, and it like it's hilarious. Like, I'm, you know, like that stuff cracks me up.
Yeah.
And you know, in my writing of like plays, monologues, and like lately a screenplay, you know, it's all in there. Like, all that's in there. It's vulgar. You know what I'm saying? So like there's a lot to be valued, I think, in both sides. But
Yeah.
I think, like, initially, especially trying to figure out my voice comedically, I think it was helpful to start out clean.
Yeah. And there's art form to being vulgar too. When I think of, you know, the old school Red Fox and LaWanda Page, and yeah, they were really smart and wise. Or even what's the guy who Eddie Murphy just did the movie for? Oh my goodness.
Rudy
Ray Moore.
Right.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between having that science down and then just being lowbrow for the sake of being lowbrow. That's where I become disinterested, and I see what you mean in terms of it's not really thoughtful. But well, here we are now where you can pretty much create your own platform. Are you thinking about doing anything stand-up wise and creating something for online?
Well, it's funny because when this all went down in March, like the pandemic and people quarantining and all, like the first, I think, week or two, I started doing these little 1-minute episodes called Claustrophobic Corner Comedy Hour Minute or something. And there's just these very quick, just random non sequiturs. Mm-hmm. And I think for like the first 2 or 3, like people were really into it, but like the fourth one, it was kind of quiet. So I was like, okay, let me just let it go. But it was just, you know, I just wanted to try something. Mm-hmm. Then after that, I became interested in writing more. So I started doing monologue contests. So I would write monologues, and then, you know, seek actors to participate. And then, you know, they would win actual financial prizes. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed doing that. And because of that, an actor that I met from New York last year reached out to me because he has been trying to develop a short film, a vehicle for him to work. And he reached out to me, and I knew his resume, and like he has a, you know, solid resume. He's, you know, done Broadway, etc. Mm-hmm. And so when he asked me, my initial thought is always, my initial reaction is always like, no, like that seems too big for me. But I was like, let me see what he's talking about and try it out. Right. And so he laid out the framework of the story he wanted to tell, and I wrote a first draft, and he read it and loved it. And so I'm like, okay. So then, you know, he came with notes, and then, you know, wrote a second draft. And so we've teamed up. He's got a producer now. He's got a couple of actors on board. Mm-hmm. And we're now like in talks with different directors. And like, I can't talk about some of the details, but it's like really cool stuff that's happening. And I'm just like, what is my life right now? Because 2 months ago, like, I would have never dreamed this.
Right.
But it's just about taking those chances. And the screenplay is comedic, but there's drama, you know, so it's kind of a nice balance. But I think to start it off, like, it has a good comedic first scene to at least get us in. And so, yeah.
When did you start writing like screenplays or plays?
Well, I mean, like, I wrote my first screenplay in college in '97. I took a screenwriting course.
Okay.
And our assignment was to write a 30-minute short screenplay back then. I haven't written a screenplay since then.
Wow.
Until this actor reached out.
Right.
And so this was my first time, but I had final draft. And I remember the formatting, and, you know, I remember some things, and, you know, then if I forgot things, I would look it up I would Google it. Mm-hmm. And so this is like the first screenplay I've written in 20 something years. But I did write my first full length play 3 years ago, which is based off of my childhood, which has had a couple of workshops and readings here in the DC area. But that's kind of where my start in writing plays and screenplays began.
So basically, you've been staying creative with, what was the title with the short form non sequiturs you were writing, and then you stopped?
Oh, the Claustrophobic Comedy Corner Hour Minute. which you can find on YouTube.
Okay, I'm gonna look for it. I'm gonna link it when at the end of this.
Yeah.
And then you get this, and then you were writing monologues, and then you get this opportunity. Now, do you think it's because we are in a space where now we're questioning everything in terms of how we start to control our own lives, our own careers, that you said, well, even though this feels big, I'm just going to try it anyway?
Yeah, because I mean, like I have time. The job I told you that I was working with closed captioning, I quit back in July in the middle of the pandemic. I quit the job. And so like I have this space now where I can sit down and spend hours writing. And so, yeah, I was like, let's just try it because, I'm enjoying the writing. I've done some Zoom performances since this whole, pandemic, and they're fine, but I think I actually prefer writing to performing on Zoom.
Right.
So I was like, yeah, just give it a try. So another time where I just stepped out there and just tried something and just see what happened.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so you just said you quit your job in the middle of a pandemic, and it took me a long time to get to the point where I'm just going to quit the job. And that was after actually leaving Bergdorf Goodman. And from there, once I got a taste of freedom, then I'll probably start a job for a little bit, but it's very clear to me that I'm only going to be there temporarily and then leave. Sure. And then I've been without a part-time job since 2012. So now I'm in this on this whole other side, but it takes courage. And I moved here in 2005, and in 2007, I was working 40 hours a week. I was stressed out, and I was living off my credit cards because I still could not earn enough money to live in LA. And I thought, why am I doing this? I didn't move to LA to work this job and be broke and be struggling or whatever. Right. So I decided that morning I was going to quit. And I went in. Of course, my boss wasn't there when I had the courage to do it. So I had to summon it back up the next day when he finally came in. Yeah. And I was fortunate because he was he was adding weekend hours to the job. And so I was able to do that. And I did that until 2012. Mm-hmm. But all this to say is that it's very hard for artists to quit a job that we know is bringing the money in, and then just trust that everything's going to be okay. So what drove you to decide it's time for me to quit this and then be okay with it? The leap of faith, I guess, is what I'm asking.
I think there's a couple of things. One, right before the pandemic hit, I was working not only this job part-time, which when I started the job, it was full-time, but 2 years ago I went part-time and I worked it from home. So it was an at-home job, which, was like, why would I quit an at-home job? But before the pandemic, I was working that. Plus, I had just started narrating audiobooks for a company in Rockville, Maryland. And then I was just like the freelance work that I was getting was like, helping to sustain in like a good fashion. So when pandemic hit, all that stopped except for this closed captioning job. Fortunately, like after a couple months, the narrating job reopened. And so like I had gone back to doing that again. And I was like, I can honestly, if I work that enough, I can make more money than I'd make with this part-time job. And the closed captioning job, though it's a great service, there's a lot of pressure and it's a very hard job because they use voice writing technology. Mm-hmm. So instead of typing, you're listening to a live audio feed and repeating verbatim what you're hearing on the news or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you have to maintain a certain accuracy, and they're tested every quarter. And when that time of the quarter would roll around, like I would just feel this immense stress because I'm like, I got to maintain this certain accuracy, this percentage that I have to maintain. And for like the last couple of years, I've been doing well. This particular quarter in March, after pandemic and the stuff with George Floyd and just all these things, all these outside things happening, my mind was just not in that job. And it's one of those jobs where your mind has to be laser focused in that half hour that you're doing this service. Right. And so like I was failing those tests, and I just felt like if I keep at this, I'm going to either, blow up or end up getting let go. And I've never been let go from a job. So I'm like, I don't want that. So I said, well, let me just go ahead and put in my 2 weeks notice and just, leave peacefully. And so I did that. I think July 3rd was my last day. And I was just like, I'm just going to trust that things are going to work out. And fortunately, like, I did the narrating job. And then like workshops started to happen, Zoom workshops, and so like freelance things start to come about. And so it's been, you know, it's been fine. But and today was my first, actually this morning was my first shoot outside of the home for Arena Stage. They had like a whole SAG shoot and everything. I'm like, oh wow, like I'm back on set. But you know, we had to go get the temperature check and face masks and all that and social distancing. But it was good to be back on a set again.
I bet. Do you think that because you have been essentially doing this for like over 20 years now, you said you graduated in 1997, do you think that all of the years that you've spent learning not just your craft but learning how to navigate the business and to get hired and get jobs and create your own opportunities also helped you to realize that by quitting this job you know that you'll be okay because you know how to find work?
That sounds really good. I'm gonna say yes. Yes, that's exactly, yep.
Okay.
I'm owning that, yes.
Yeah. Whether you're conscious of it or not.
I mean, that's always the hope. You know, there have been some times when I quit jobs and just sank, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, but, you know, at least, you know, able to keep afloat for now.
Right.
And then, but, you know, like, opportunities are popping up now, and there's some things that I can't talk about. Like, in a month or so, like you'll understand. But there's some really cool things that have popped up. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what's my life right now?
Right. I think by the time I post this, it'll probably have been revealed, and then you can send me links, and I can put all that stuff in there. It's like, this is what he was talking about, y'all. That's why he was giddy. Stuff was
bubbling. Yeah.
I understand. So, okay. So we talked about what you've been doing during quarantine. Has there been anything that's been really inspiring for you? You know, you talked about, you know, the heaviness. We've known about Black men being murdered for 400 years, right? And then it's felt like an onset to most Americans because now it's broadcast, because now we have the internet. And I think there's something to be said about this quarantine allowing people to no longer be disconnected or caught up in everyday life, to really have empathy or feel the death of George Floyd. And for me, Ahmaud Arbery, seeing that flattened me out because to actually watch the murder really did me in. I didn't watch George Floyd's. I could just see the video, the picture, and that's enough. So is there anything that you were able to do or found that allowed you to be inspired or fill yourself back up again and keep getting out there?
As I mentioned earlier, DC is such an amazing connected community. And I, like, in 2005, right after I got back from New York, a friend of mine and Dion, a group of us started a support network called Galvanize. And we linked heads with another organization, Actors Arena here in town, to have a vigil for, this is after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. And we were able to connect with Arena Stage and to provide like an outdoor space. And so we organized in like, I think it was a week, this like place for the artists to come together, or the theater film community to come together in front of Arena Stage and grieve. We had performances from some of the local theater artists. We've had speakers, just like several, you know, events during that big event. And I think for many of us, it was the first time that we were able to connect again as a community, like to stand in the same space together, because we had only seen each other at this point, you know, on Zoom or talk to each other on the phone. And so I think for a lot of us, it was about, you know, so the social aspect, but also just a chance to like come together and just mourn what had been going on and what's still going on. But I think that kind of helped to recharge and to know that, okay, there are people out here who understand. And it was people, you know, it was Black people, Asian people, Latinx people, white people, you know, there's all of us were there together, united to say, hey, you know, like we're here to, you know, and we're not, you know, letting this pass by or, you know, ignoring it or, You know, so I think that was like the big marker for me, and just helping to keep my spirits afloat.
Yeah, I get that. For seeing so many people galvanize across the world it just allowed me to feel seen, allowed me to feel like you guys are finally understanding what we've been talking about. Great.
And the music and the movies.
Yeah, right.
Years.
Yeah. It's definitely a different time, and it feels good, but we're still here, and it's
Time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. Exactly. Hopefully it will change. So, well, you can't talk about any of the upcoming projects right now, and that's okay. I'm excited to.
Oh, believe me, I really want to.
I know you do. I know. It's okay. I can't wait to hear about it. But no, we got to honor, that the secrecy of the confidentiality of what those projects are. But is there anything that let me see. So we talked about the comedy, and then you're writing something right now. Is there anything else that you want us to know before we depart?
When I got the invitation to do this, I was so excited because, Tiwana, you are like one of the most amazing friends that I've happened to encounter in my life. And like we had that year and a half together in New York, and we had that little group that we would get together with every Sunday and like talk about goals and like how we going, what we're going to do, and etc. But just like any chance to reconnect with you, whether on the trips to LA to see my in-laws, or now through Zoom, like just to like gather your spirit and your energy, like it's just such a blessing.
Thank you.
And like some of the things that I did, I remember. I don't know if it was the last visit or last time I saw you, or when you came to visit us at my sister-in-law's house. But I remember you telling me like, okay, you need to go back home and you need to like reopen your IMDb Pro account. You need to like do that, and you need to like, be open to like filming your like create characters, put them on tape.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And
like you told me these things, and like when you tell me something, I like resist for a little while, but then I'm like, yo, she's right. Like, and so like you. And I don't know, who tells you this, but the way you move through the world, you offer so much help, and you give so much. And I know like LA has a reputation for being kind of, this isolating, or, like this place, if you're in the business. But like, I think LA has a blessing having you there. And it's because you're East Coast, you're from New York, so you come from the East Coast. So I think it's that grounding. But like, just to have your energy out in LA is amazing. And I hope that more of my friends who are out there get a chance to like connect with you and you see what I'm talking about. Like you're an incredible person.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the feeling is mutual. I think I'm baffled that it was only a year and a half. It feels like it was so much longer, but we've stayed in touch through MySpace, through emails, through Netflix, through like we've stayed in touch through so many platforms, and we'll continue to do so. And I'm just glad to know you, man. Feeling is definitely mutual. I think that you are such a profound, talented actor. It's almost like you morph into somebody else. I don't know who takes over your body.
Wow.
Especially when you get very resonant in your voice. I'm like, that's not JJ. Who is that? So I think that I believe that I am a vessel. People tell me that I've told them things so many times. Most times I don't remember. So I know that spirit's speaking through me, but I do remember telling you about characters. And I think that came from, because at the time I was immersed in improv, and I'm recognizing the importance and the value that having that character work is, especially now. So I can see why I would tell you that, knowing that you have the propensity to create them. So yeah.
No, I thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I'll just keep being a vessel, and we'll stay connected for as long as we possibly can.
Yeah, maybe one day work together.
That would be great. We did one.
Oh yeah. My grand New York finale, like that was on my way out. My last non-union gig.
It was like a night before Christmas.
It was a Caribbean Christmas Carol.
A Caribbean Christmas Carol, which
Deborah Ann Bird was in that too.
That's right, because that is how I
Definitely.
met her. That is how I
Right,
met her. I was
right.
a fan before, and then I got to meet her, and I was like, oh, she's a pleasurable person to work with.
Right,
But
right.
I remember, I think we did it at a public school, and we probably had an audience of about 5 people. And I can't remember the woman who wrote that, but she was lovely. I really liked her, but I can't remember her name.
I remember her
And
name.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was about 5 people there, and that was my first time performing with 5 people in the audience, and I didn't know what to do with that. I understand it now that it's a gift, but I didn't know back then what that was. And so I could not get grounded. And I remember there was one guy I was acting with, and he was a, like, what you would call like a live wire, a wild card. He was a wild card. I don't know if you remember that guy. He was a wild
Yeah,
card.
I do.
And so the blocking was, he was supposed to come this way every time we did that. And then this one day I come out and he's nowhere to be found. And I'm not knowing improv at that time, stressed out. And then he comes from a different direction. And I was so pissed. I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, I guess I barely remember that thing. I guess I still went with it, but I was so pissed. But now that I have improv skills, I'm like, oh, that's not a problem. I could have just done
Yeah.
something until he showed up, and it's actually fun. It's actually a gift now.
I remember feeling bad because I think I brought you into that. I think it was for an actor. And I was like, oh, I know an actor. And I think I brought you in. And then like, after a while, I was like, oh, what did I do?
Oh,
Like,
but it wasn't horrible. It wasn't horrific, though. I
yeah.
think because that the woman, I'm gonna have to try to find her name now, but the writer director, because she was kind, so it wasn't horrible. It was just, she was probably just starting out and finding her way. But I've had way far worse experiences than that, so that was not a problem. It was actually a great experience to have.
Good.
But yeah, we'll work together on something someday. For sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, JJ, thank you for saying yes.
Absolutely. Great to chop it up with you.
It was great to talk to you.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching Creatives in Quarantine. Follow JJ on Instagram to keep current with all his projects. And you can probably look at IMDb to see what he's working on now. Shh. In the meantime, subscribe. I'm trying to build my viewership here. If you like what you see, do that. Until next time, bye.